I'm going to show you how to create professional newborn photos right in your own garage, and then I'm going to take you through from start to finish to get to this final image. My name is Pi, and I'm one of the founders of Lynn and Jersa Photography and SLRLounge.com. We're teaming up with Adorama to bring you a new series of photography tutorials called Master Your Craft right here on Adorama TV. So let's dive in. What's up, friends? My name is Pi. Welcome to Adorama TV. I gotta say, it's nice being back in the studio, and it's wonderful being back here with y'all. So I did this little family shoot in my own garage. I thought it'd be fun to walk you guys through the entire shoot as well as through the edit to create the final images, because you can create professional images no matter what. You can create them in your own garage. So let's start first with how I shot this picture of my baby girl, Josie. And I knew after I shot this photograph, I was like, I gotta put Josie into a tutorial. She's so adorable. So first, let's talk about the lighting. Now, as you're gonna see, we're right here in my garage. The garage door is to my left, and that is our main light source. Now, for most of you, the inside of your garage is probably a nice, bright, neutral color. That's great, because what's going to happen is that main light is going to come in and kind of bounce around the entire room and give you really nice fill. So as you'll see in the portrait, we have that main light directly to Josie's left side. And because it's this nice, large light source, even though we're kind of deep inside of the garage, it still wraps nicely around her. We have that fill, all of that. So what I've done is actually placed this backdrop, and I think I just used a couple chairs and A-clamps, and this backdrop is actually from, I think, Backdrops by Ethan Alex. But we'll link up his name below. I've mentioned him a few times. Great custom backdrop maker. You guys can make your own backdrops if you like. If you don't have one, real easy. Just go and grab a bed sheet. It could be a white bed sheet, a colored bed sheet, a black bed sheet. Any bed sheet is going to totally work. Mount it with a couple A-clamps and you're good to go. All right, so once that's all set up, you're going to go ahead and place your subject. Now, if you are working with a newborn like Josie, well, she can't quite fully sit up on her own without a little bit of assistance. So I actually have mom sitting right next to her, and Yen, my lovely partner in crime, is making sure that Josie doesn't kind of fall over, tip back, because she is sitting on a concrete surface. So just make sure you keep mom there for safety. If the child is older, of course, you don't need this. So that's all good. Now, when we get to the overall exposure, at this point, you can honestly choose whatever camera you'd like. To be honest, you can get this shot with just a phone if you'd like. If you're using your phone, Android or iPhone, go ahead and use portrait mode or portrait mode equivalent to shoot the shot. You'll get a little bit better results and a blurry background and whatnot. And from that standpoint, really the phone's going to do most everything for you. If you're using a dedicated camera, you can use practically anything. Now, I'm not using practically anything. See, Fuji actually sent me the GFX 100S, and I'm playing with it along with the new 80mm lens that comes along with it. It's an incredible combo. It's close to a $10,000 combo, but it's absolutely an incredible camera, and the images out of the camera are awesome. What you're actually looking at is the JPEG file, because I can't even yet look at the RAW files. Adobe has not updated Lightroom to support RAW files from the GFX 100 yet. But that's okay. We're going to edit with just the JPEGs. They are beautiful in and of themselves. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the GFX later, but honestly, for this shot, you can use anything. So pick the camera of choice. What I would recommend, though, is a 50mm prime lens or an 85mm prime lens as kind of the lenses of choice for this type of shot. So with that kind of natural light setup with garage lighting, again, depending a little bit on time of day, we're roughly around 1/400 of a second, f2 and ISO 400. I know the GFX lets in quite a bit of light, so you're going to be somewhere between, like, say 400, 800 ISO, and just make sure that when you're working with children, you're keeping your shutter speed up just a bit, because they have a tendency to move quick. Like Josie's smile and laugh happens really fast, and at 1/200 of a second, it's not going to be quite sharp enough. So really 1/400, ideally 1/500 of a second and up is where you want to be. Last, when it comes to working with kids, you'll want something to grab their attention. Now, this could be a unique toy, it could be a noisemaker, whatever you like. I'm having Ellie, my daughter, actually stand directly behind the lens. So when she catches Josie's attention, Josie looks right forward towards the camera. but make sure you remove every other distraction. Kids have a tendency to be distracted by everything. So if there's other brothers and sisters doing something, if there's dogs, if there's animals, anything else is going to pull their attention and make it difficult for you to get them to look into the camera. So you want one attention grabber. All right, so we get this shot. This is a perfect time for you to pause the video. Make sure you download the exercise file, which is going to be this JPEG. And I believe it is a 100 megapixel JPEG. Now, this isn't the best image to actually show you sharpness because the image itself is slightly front focused. You'll notice that it's actually a little more focused on the lips and maybe even the nose than on the eyes, but still it's acceptable. It's a perfect expression. Looks fantastic either way. But later, I'll talk more about the GFX and kind of the detail and everything you get on an actual tack sharp image. Okay, for now, let's just go ahead and work with this file inside of Lightroom. So get it loaded up. Now, once you're loaded, I have come into the develop module. And what we're going to do first is I like to start editing with kind of the biggest adjustments and work my way down. So let's start with number 1, crop. I'm going to press R to bring up the cropping tool. You'll notice that I have the overlay set to this, well, grids basically, right? Or the thirds. So if you just press O with the cropping tool selected, so press R, then press O, you can actually cycle through all the different overlays that are available to you. And you can choose whatever ones you'd like. It really doesn't matter. But what I'm going to do is actually bring the crop down and frame Josie while leaving a little bit of space for her. Okay, so I'm going to kind of pull down, leaving her face kind of right in the center of this frame. Okay, again, I can cycle to, any of these different compositional tools that I like, but you'll notice that really what I'm aiming at is kind of getting her right in the center of this photograph and leaving negative space around her. There's a few different reasons for this. One, I kind of like the overall look, but two, whenever you're taking images like this to print, you want a little bit of negative space for cropping during print. It could be cropping to kind of get it into a frame. It could be an album, whatever it might be. It could even be your blog usage. But oftentimes I see photographers cropping really tightly down on a photograph. And the problem with that is now it doesn't have anywhere to go when you actually take it to print or to the blog or to an album. So I like to leave a little bit of room for not only kind of artistic purposes, but for practical purposes when it comes to the final usage of the photograph. So we have a bit of work now to do. So we're going to start with base tone adjustments. We're going to work through to color, and then we're going to do a bit of retouch work, and we're also going to do some enhancement work right here inside of Lightroom. Lightroom is incredibly powerful. I often find that people kind of underestimate, or maybe they just haven't learned how much you can potentially do inside of Lightroom. So we are, of course, using Lightroom Classic. Most everything does translate over to Lightroom CC, but Lightroom Classic is really where I would stay if you're kind of working on raw files and really want to get the best out of your desktop experience, okay? So let's go ahead and start now with base tone adjustments. So that's kind of, I refer to everything in the basic panel. I know there's a tendency to come to exposure first, but I'm not going to do that. I want you guys to actually think a little bit different. What we're going to do is actually even out highlights. So I'm going to pull the highlights down a bit, and I'm going to pull the white point down a little bit. So what I'm doing is aiming to kind of just even out a little bit of those highlights on the opposite side of the skin. And I might leave highlights around -25, whites down further to kind of eliminate some of the bright highlight. Then I'm going to pull shadows up a bit, okay? Right around +30 is good. I'm going to also pull blacks up a bit. Now, what I like to do with newborn portraits is I generally like them to be a little bit more soft, a little more bright, and a little bit less contrasty. This is, again, an editing style that is designed for really the subject matter, right? When I teach photography, I really teach the why behind everything that you do. When it comes to the way that you light, if we're shooting, we want to have more of a soft look and feel, then use a soft light. If you want more edgy, more kind of punch to it, then use something more contrast. So here we have a very soft light source, and granted, we could have brought Josie quite a bit closer to the door. Not sure why I didn't on that day. I think I just had my gym equipment all over the place. But ideally, you bring the subject closer to the light source, okay? But either way, it's still going to be quite soft for a light source. And now I'm pairing that with a soft editing style. So I'm bringing the blacks up quite a bit. Now, this is where I'm going to kind of touch my contrast. I'm going to lower a little bit and then I'm going to brighten the exposure a bit, okay? Notice that that's kind of backwards from how most photographers approach editing. They kind of usually would start with exposure and contrast and then go down here. I'm usually working the opposite way. I'm getting my kind of basic tone adjustments in, and then I'm working backwards to exposure as I need, okay? All right, so I actually like that, and you can build whatever you want in the tone curve. If I was creating a preset, I'd usually build all of this actually into the tone curve itself, leaving this for myself to basically make other adjustments. But we're good with that right here. Let's go ahead and bring the clarity up a little bit. With texture, honestly, if this were tack sharp, I'd probably reduce texture a little bit, but it's not, so I'm gonna leave texture where it's at. Let's just go ahead and fine tune our white balance. Press W to get the white balance selector. What I like to do is look for something neutral, okay? That can really be anything, so long as it's actually being touched by the primary light source. See, you don't want to go to an area of shadow and then take a white balance from that area because it's not the main light. So what I like to do is look closer to kind of the main light and see if I can find something neutral and then take a read off that. But honestly, most everything in this shot does have kind of some tinting. So we can start there and then just make some adjustments. So what I'm going to do is just go to that -7. I actually like the green. The only difference is I'm going to raise temperature by just a bit. Because this is a JPEG file, you'll not quite have the same control over white balance, but we can still get pretty close to where we want to go. Okay, so that's pretty nice. Now if I press backslash, you can kind of see the before and the after. Notice how the eyes kind of already start popping as we're lifting the shadows a little bit. Again, you would get a little bit more of that if you brought baby a little closer to the garage or whoever you're shooting, a little bit closer to the door itself. You could also add a fill on the other side. If you wanted to, you could put a reflector or anything you want on that side, okay? So this looks nice. Let's go ahead and go to our next step. We're gonna start tweaking our HSL a little bit, okay? So what I really wanna do here is I generally like to pull a little bit of the oranges out and a little bit of the reds out of the skin tones. And then everything else is pretty good. There's honestly not that much other, color in this shot. What I might do is just kind of remove any greens, any aquas, anything that might be sort of not really the color in this scene, right? So sometimes when you're working with natural daylight from a window light source like that, you will get some of these blues that kind of come in. See, if I turn the blues up, you can actually see exactly where I'm talking about. So what I'll often do is actually remove the blues from the shot, and this kind of gives everything a little bit more of a neutral kind of palette where it takes that blue out of any reflection or any white point in the image. So I'm going to do that same thing over here and reduce saturation. Everything else looks pretty good. What I'm also going to do is add a tiny bit of color grade. So I love that we have this now inside of Lightroom. All I'm going to do is add a tiny bit of warmth to the highlights and to the shadows to kind of unify colors, okay? So I find this easier to do if you go into like the primary. It's a little bit difficult from this three-way to kind of adjust each thing. So I like going into this side and then adjusting from there. So we can do this a number of different ways. You can do it visually if you like. What I often like to do is kind of match to skin tone. So I'm going to pull it kind of up towards this side, and I'm going to just find the right color first. So often when I'm finding the right color, I like for it to be a little bit more than what I want in terms of saturation. But once I found that hue, then I'm simply going to dial the saturation back. Okay, so I'm going to go to like saturation of like 5. Very slight. Okay, I'm going to pull the blend up just a little bit, and now I'm going to go to midtones, add a tiny bit of color there as well, a little bit more warmth. We're going to go to similar kind of hue settings, and again around saturation of about 5. Okay, I'm going to use this to kind of brighten my midpoint just a little bit of the, brighten the luminosity of the midtones a little bit, and then keep the balance where it's at. I'm going to go to the shadows, and you have a couple different options. In the shadows, it sometimes looks good to add a little bit of like blues, a little bit of greens. Honestly, you can do whatever you like here. I'm going to put a tiny bit of blues into the shadows. Okay, right about there. Again, 5 on the saturation. I'm I'm also going to raise the luminance of those shadows just ever so slightly. So we get to kind of right here. So all that really does is that tiny bit of color just adds a little bit of extra polish to the color tone. Now, if I turn this on and off, it's probably going to be a little bit difficult to see, but you can see what's happening is we get a little bit more of these consistent colors throughout the image. And that's what I love using the color grade for, is not only creating stylistic looks, but also to help clean up existing color. Okay, it's a way that we often don't think of necessarily when it comes to editing. I'm gonna do this now. I'm gonna warm this up ever so slightly. Again, it's a JPEG, so I'm going by like -2, maybe -3 of adjustment. And that looks great right there. Okay, so going down to detail, honestly here, I'm not gonna do too much, mainly because it's not tack sharp anyway. So whatever I'm sharpening is gonna really mostly apply to the clothing and stuff like that. And it doesn't really matter for this particular shot. I'm also gonna leave lens corrections, everything else turned off. I don't think there's really anything else that we need for this. Let's see, transform, yeah, everything else is good. Let's go ahead. We're not gonna do any vignetting or anything like that. I wanna leave this bright from edge to edge on this image. Now with our color dialed in, let's do just a tiny bit of retouch. So what I'm gonna do first is again start with spot removal, and I'm gonna use my mouse for all of this stuff, okay? Because a lot of you don't have a tablet, and honestly when it comes to Lightroom work, I don't really recommend using a tablet. What I am gonna do is zoom in a bit. At 100%, this gets ridiculously close, just because, yeah, it's a high resolution image. So let's get rid of some of these little dots kind of right by the mouth. Lightroom usually does a really good job of just kind of guessing those items that I'm removing. And we're just going to kind of keep clicking into each of these. And side note, if you start noticing a bit of lag, just make sure that your graphics card is supported. Lightroom actually now supports graphics card acceleration. And so when you're doing local adjustments, it should be fairly snappy with, so long as you're using a graphics card that's actually supported. Okay. With that brush, remember that you can kind of drop it in as just a spot removal. You can also kind of paint it in by just dragging. All right, it's doing a good job of selecting each area, and automatically, I mean, it looks really good. The face is already cleaned up. I'm gonna go in here. Newborns have a tendency to have quite a bit of flaky skin. Most of the time, if it's bad, we honestly need to go into Photoshop, but most of the time it's not too crazy and you can do a lot of that work right there in Lightroom just like that. So now let's do a tiny bit more retouch. There's a couple things that I want to do. First, notice how our feet are just a little bit pink because we're seeing the bottoms of the feet, whereas we're seeing like skin tone that's a little bit more warm up here on the other areas, right? So what I'm going to do is select an adjustment brush. Now from here, I'm just going to reset this exposure thing out. Make sure everything is basically reset. And all you're going to do is turn the temperature up a little bit. If you want to turn it up a lot, that way you can kind of see the adjustment go in, then that is one way to kind of easily see exactly what you're painting over. And sometimes I do like to do that because it's a little bit easier than trying to keep it low and painting it in. So just once you get that mask a little bit refined, hold down Alt or Option. You can kind of paint it off areas that you don't want it. And then from there, you're simply going to dial it back. Honestly, we probably only need this to be around like +10. And you'll notice that that is fixed. So if I turn this on and off, the skin tone on the feet is now matching the rest of her hands and face. So that's perfect. So now, the other thing that I'm noticing here is that these smile lines are a little bit on the dark side. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is just go in here. I'm actually using a retouching toolkit from Visual Flow Retouching Tools. Okay, so Visual Flow is our preset company, and what I'm showing you is very close to kind of getting us towards this pastel look and vibe. So if you don't have the retouching toolkit, that's totally okay. What you're gonna do is just dial it in. So what I want is this right here, diminish lines. What you'll notice it doing is it's pulling down contrast, pulling down texture, and pulling down clarity. So just dial that in. And what you're gonna do is use that over smile lines, okay? And you can instantly see that it kind of just brightens up those areas. In fact, I'm gonna use it kind of over the lip as well, right here, just to kind of soften that smile a little bit, right? And bring it right up to the nose. Perfect. And I'm also noticing while I'm here, there are a little bit of specks right under, looks like little flakes of skin or something. Or boogers. No parent wants to admit that those are boogers. They're not boogers. It's little pieces of cuteness. That's what that is. Okay, so this little thing, if you wanted to fix something like that, that's probably more of a job for Photoshop. It's a little bit difficult to get into lines like this inside of Lightroom, just because it has a tendency to clone and copy, and you have to get really, really close and precise on this kind of stuff. Granted, it's very not noticeable. Like if we're looking at this image, you know, from here, you totally can't tell. So don't wig yourself out, especially when you're working with high resolution cameras. Oftentimes we end up retouching too much, and we're kind of retouching as if we're looking at the image at 100%. And a good way around that is scale the image to your screen to the size that it's going to be in print. So if it's going to be like, say, an 8x12, this is already an 8x12 size. Okay, on my screen, this is an 8x12. So I shouldn't be retouching anything that I can't see from this view right here. So that's a good rule of thumb to kind of use when it comes to not over editing or over retouching. So the last thing I'm going to do, I want to show you guys how to make a nice little brush to bring the eyes out a little bit. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and zoom into the eyes. What I'm going to do is first select, again, from the retouching tools, whiten. So what you'll notice is this is just plus 20 highlights, plus 50 whites, minus 10 saturation. There's a little bit of sharpening. So dial those settings in, save it out as a new brush if you'd like. And then what we're going to do is paint this in right over this right side. Now holding down Alt or Option, this is going to remove, and I want you to increase the size of your brush. You can just use your mouse wheel to do that. And then paint it off the shadow areas of the eye. So what you're doing is kind of following the natural highlights, and I'm going to paint it off the bottom of the eye. Now I like to do this if I want to get this close to, like if I want to get this refined, I like to do this separately on each eye. And the reason is the left eye is already quite bright, and if I end up brightening it more, it's going to look unnatural. So what I'm going to do on the right eye is hold down Alt or Option. Now the settings that you just dialed in have been tested to incrementally be adjustable. So if you hold down Alt or Option, click on that pin and pull it to the right, it's going to brighten while keeping contrast and everything where it's at. Yeah, we put a lot of work into visual flow presets. It takes a lot of time. But now you have that setting. So what you're going to do is once that's dialed in, the eye's kind of bright, then you're going to zoom back out and just kind of compare. Make sure that they're good. Now notice on this side, the catch light is nice and bright right there, but kind of dark and a little bit not so bright on this side. So what we're going to do is do another brush, and this time you're going to save out this one as your catch light enhancer. So again, the settings are right here. Pause the video, dial them in, but all you're going to do is paint that, and I'm going to do it in roughly the same way that it's kind of landing on this side. So the left side I'm going to make brighter, and it's going to feather into the right side. I'm going to paint it off anything other than just that area of the eye. Okay, now again, I can kind of hold down Alt or Option, pull to the right to brighten a bit, and call it good right about there. Now we have a catch light on both sides that match, and this makes a substantial difference. Side note, don't over brighten one side. If I do that, if I go onto this side and I brighten it, you're gonna notice once that's done, it kind of looks like she has one glass eye and one real eye. Okay, so we don't want to go and over retouch. We just want it to be nice, natural. We want it to pop. And look at the difference though. So I'm going to turn this, let me just turn the brushes on and off so you can see the difference is huge in terms of the smile lines, as well as the way that the eyes are kind of popping out. Everything looks fantastic. Now I think there is a tiny bit of one of those brushes. Oh, it's the, which brush landed on her? Okay, there was a tiny bit of a catch light enhance on this side. So if I wanted to though, I could actually use a little bit of that catch light enhancer just to like kind of get a pin sort of right on the bright spot of each eye, right? Okay, I'm just gonna do the same thing on both eyes and then make sure it looks natural. We're gonna zoom out and make sure it looks like a natural catch light, and you get that one like little bright point. This little nice little spot right there adds a lot of life to the eyes. All right, so we are done. Let's check out the final before versus the after on this little JPEG edit. And we have now created a professional newborn portrait right in our own garage. Again, use any camera you like. I gave you guys substitutes for cameras, substitutes for backdrops. You have all the tools you need, and you now know how to edit it. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, I'd love for you to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so I can see you guys back here next week, and comment below. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if there's topics and things that you guys want me to talk about that we haven't so far. And whew, those are a lot of words. So I'll see you guys next time. Peace.